The phone rang like it always did. Nothing out of the ordinary. But that day, I heard what would forever sear my motherhood. It was like being slapped across the face by the very person I brought into this world. My daughter. My only child. The one I would have given my last breath for. And just like that, the years of sacrifice, the sleepless nights, the times I scraped by so she could have more, they shattered into silence. But I didn't cry. Not then. Because something inside me changed. Something inside me stood up. And trust me, by the end, you'll understand why you should never underestimate a mother who's been pushed too far. Subscribe if you're ready for a story that will break your heart and put it back together, piece by piece. Let me know in the comments if you've ever learned the truth because someone forgot to hang up. It was a quiet Tuesday morning. I was folding laundry, my usual routine, towels, socks, the faded nightgown I still wore even though it had lost its softness years ago. I picked up without looking at the screen. "Hello?" I said, my voice light, hoping it was my daughter. But there was no reply. Just a shuffle, then a laugh, distant, muffled. I looked at the screen. The call was still connected. She hadn't hung up. At first, I thought maybe she'd pocket-dialed me. I was about to hang up when I heard it, her voice, clear, sharp. "She called me again this morning," she said, followed by a sigh so heavy it made my chest tighten. "Honestly, I can't deal with her today. Every time it's the same, some boring story about her neighbor or the damn cat knocking something over." Laughter. Not hers. A man's voice. Probably her husband. "You mean the cat that's replacing you as her emotional support?" "Exactly," she laughed. "I swear sometimes I wonder if she even realizes how pathetic she sounds. Always so needy. Like, I'm sorry your friends are dying and you're lonely, but I have a life, Mom." I stopped folding. My hands froze over a towel I had just smoothed out. Her words didn't just sting, they pierced. Every syllable was a knife turned slowly. She wasn't talking to me, but she was revealing the truth she had never dared say to my face. A truth she had been hiding behind politeness, and those rushed, sorry gotta run phone calls. I listened, each second stretching into eternity. "She just doesn't get it," she went on. "I have a job, a husband. I can't drop everything because she's feeling a bit blue. Like, sorry if life isn't a Hallmark movie anymore, but that's not my fault." I blinked, staring out the window. The sky was gray, the same as it had been every day that week. The sea in the distance churned quietly. It was high tide. My husband used to love mornings like this. He'd brew coffee while I fed the birds. We'd talk. Simple, warm mornings. Gone now. All gone. "She keeps hinting about visiting. I can't deal with her coming here. The way she just lingers. Always watching, always commenting. It's exhausting. I mean, when is she finally going to realize she doesn't belong in our life anymore?" That last sentence. That one broke something in me. I felt it, not like a crash, but a quiet snapping. A severing of something delicate and sacred. My daughter, the little girl I raised, held through fevers and heartbreaks, encouraged through every stage of her life, was now talking about me like I was some unwanted burden. An interruption. I pressed the phone closer, as if trying to make sure I hadn't imagined it. But I hadn't. She kept talking. The same voice that once called me Mommy, in a whisper when monsters hid under the bed, was now tearing me apart like I was a problem to solve, not a person to love. And still, I said nothing. I didn't hang up. I just listened. Eventually, the call ended. Maybe she realized the line was open. Maybe she didn't care. I set the phone down, gently, as though it might break. But I was the thing that had shattered. There was no yelling, no tears, just silence. Thick, cruel silence. I stood in the middle of the living room, suddenly a stranger in my own world. She didn't know I'd heard her. She didn't know that today, a quiet Tuesday, would be the last day she ever got to take my love for granted. Something inside me had awakened. And if she thought I was weak, she was about to learn what happens when you underestimate the very woman who taught you how to stand. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my hands clenched in fists beneath the covers, the weight of her voice pressing down on my chest like a stone. Every word she'd said replayed in perfect, cruel clarity, looping over and over until I felt like I was drowning in them. She doesn't belong in our life anymore. That was the one that twisted deepest. I raised that girl. I gave her everything. Sacrificed weekends, dinners, sleep. I went without, so she could have enough. When her father died, I was the one who held it all together. For her. For us. I worked 2 jobs, packed lunches with little notes in them, kissed her scraped knees, braided her hair, and stayed up all night sewing a Halloween costume she wore once and never thanked me for. And now, she wanted me erased. Quietly, like an old photograph that no longer fit the decor. I got out of bed before the sun rose. The sky was still dark, but I didn't need light. I didn't need anything but the clarity I had found in the silence. My daughter, my only child, had decided I was an inconvenience, someone to be tolerated, not cherished. And I would not beg for space in her life. I moved through the house like a ghost. The kettle whistled in the kitchen, the sound shrill and unforgiving, mirroring the thoughts in my head. I poured the tea and sat in my usual spot by the window, the one that looked out toward the sea. It used to bring me peace. But this morning, it only reflected how far away everything felt now. A single text from her came through around 9 a.m. "Morning, Mom. Sorry I missed your call yesterday. Everything okay?" I stared at the screen for a long time. The lie tasted bitter just reading it. She hadn't missed my call. I hadn't even made one. She'd forgotten to hang up, that was the truth. And now here she was, acting like everything was fine, as if she hadn't gutted me with her own tongue. I didn't reply. I couldn't. There was nothing to say to someone who could wear a mask that convincingly, who could smile sweetly in one breath and slice you open in the next. I needed to be smart, calm, strategic, because this wasn't going to be a confrontation. It was going to be a reckoning. By the time lunch came around, I had already pulled out the box from under my bed, the one marked estate documents. It had collected dust for years, untouched, because I had always known where everything would go. To her, the house, the money, the furniture. Every last thing I had poured my life into, I planned to hand over to my daughter with pride, knowing she would carry it forward. But now, I saw the truth. She hadn't earned any of it. Not my home, not my love, not the legacy built from my blood and my grief. I opened the folder and stared at the will I had written 10 years ago. Her name was everywhere. The primary beneficiary, the executor, the sole heir. My entire world, printed in ink and signatures. I picked up the pen with steady hands and began to cross her out. Each stroke of ink felt like surgery, cutting out the infection before it could spread. With every letter I removed, I felt lighter, more awake. I wasn't acting out of rage. I wasn't trying to hurt her. I was doing what she had already done, only I was honest about it. She wanted me gone from her life? Fine. Then she would be gone from mine. No warning, no drama. Just a clean, quiet exit. The kind she had given me. It was only when I placed the pen down that I realized my cheeks were wet. Not with grief. That was already behind me. This was something else. A mourning of who I used to be. The mother who made excuses for her daughter's coldness. the woman who accepted scraps of affection and called it love. She was gone now, and in her place stood someone new, someone who no longer begged to be remembered, someone who was finally ready to be heard. The days that followed were quiet, eerily so. But it was a different kind of quiet than I'd ever known before. It wasn't peaceful. It wasn't calm. It was sharp. It echoed. Like the kind of silence that comes after a slammed door or a final goodbye. She had no idea what I'd done. No idea that the will, the very thing I used to polish like a family heirloom in her name, was no longer hers. She was walking around in her world, blissfully unaware that I had pulled the rug out from under her. That the house she once rolled her eyes at, the antiques she joked about selling, the money she already assumed would one day pad her lifestyle, they were all gone from her future now. She didn't know, but she would. I kept waiting to feel guilt. I thought maybe I'd wake up in the middle of the night, heart pounding, whispering her name through tears. I thought I'd look at old photographs and second-guess myself. But that never came. What came instead was the rage. A quiet, crawling rage that had lived beneath my skin for years, disguised as unconditional love. I started remembering things I hadn't let myself feel the first time. How she hadn't visited me after I'd fallen and bruised my ribs last winter, claiming she was swamped with work, then posted beach photos with her friends the same day. How she'd rolled her eyes when I asked for help setting up my email, as though needing help at 72 made me a burden. How she'd laughed, actually laughed, when I told her I still sometimes talk to her father in my dreams. I used to excuse her coldness as stress. She had a career, a husband, a life. I convinced myself that my needs were small, that I was being too sensitive. But now I saw it clearly. I had mistaken neglect for independence. I had called her cruelty busy. I had let her harden, and I stood on the sidelines, applauding her sharpness as strength. But it wasn't strength. It was selfishness. She hadn't grown strong. She had grown distant, entitled, and I had let her. The doorbell rang on Thursday afternoon, and I nearly didn't answer it. I thought about pretending I wasn't home, letting the weight of her own neglect settle in like dust. But curiosity pulled me up from the armchair. I opened the door. There she stood, my daughter. A to-go coffee in one hand, phone in the other, as if her presence needed to be split into two lives at once. She looked up at me, smiling like she hadn't said the things she said, like she hadn't carved out my worth with a scalpel. "Hi, Mom," she said brightly. "I was in the neighborhood. Thought I'd stop by." I studied her face. Her eyes were the same hazel as her father's. The shape of her lips matched mine. But there was a tightness in her expression, a clipped performative cheer that rang hollow. "Were you?" I asked, stepping aside. She walked in like it was still her home, still hers by default, still a future she'd earned without ever doing the work. She made herself comfortable on the couch. I didn't sit. "I sent you a message the other day. You didn't respond," she said, sipping her drink. "Everything okay?" I nodded slowly. "Yes, just been busy." Her brows lifted, amused. "Busy? You?" I stared at her. That single smirk, it confirmed everything. She didn't respect me. She didn't see me as a woman, just as a placeholder in her story, a line item in her inheritance, an obligation. "Well," she continued, "I was actually going to talk to you about something. We've been thinking, me and Matt, maybe it's time you considered selling the house. You know, moving into something smaller, closer to us, easier to manage." The rage didn't explode. It simmered, controlled. Precision-cut fury behind a calm breath. "I've already thought about that," I said. She perked up, smiling wide, sensing victory. "Oh? Really?" "Yes. And I've made some changes, I replied. To the will, to the estate, to everything. Her face flickered, just slightly, a crack in her practiced calm. What do you mean, changes? I tilted my head, smiling gently. You'll find out soon enough. Because I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to cry. I was going to let her feel it the way she made me feel it. Slow, unexpected, and utterly devastating. She wouldn't hear a word of cruelty from me. She'd feel it in the silence. She didn't say anything for a long moment. Just sat there with her coffee cup suspended in midair, like she wasn't sure if she should take another sip or throw it against the wall. Her lips parted once, as if to speak, but nothing came out. I watched her try to piece together what I meant. She looked exactly like someone who'd been caught off guard, someone so used to getting her way. The idea of being left out of the plan wasn't even in her vocabulary. The silence between us stretched thin, tighter than a wire. Then, finally, she broke it. What do you mean I'll find out soon enough? Her voice had changed. No more sweetness. No more false charm. It had dropped a full octave, cold and sharp. I stayed calm. That was the part that surprised me the most. How calm I felt. Like I had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times, even though I never thought it would happen. My heart didn't race. My hands didn't tremble. For the first time in years, I was standing in my own home without apology. I mean, I said slowly, deliberately, you should probably call Thomas. The lawyer. If you still have his number. She blinked, processing. You changed the will? She asked, her voice rising slightly. I didn't respond right away. I just looked at her. And in that look, I hoped she could finally see it. The weight of every wound, every overlooked holiday, every time I called and was met with a distracted, sorry, can I call you back later? That never came. When I finally answered, my voice was as even as the sea outside the window. Yes. Her mouth opened, then shut again. I didn't flinch. I didn't offer an explanation or a chance for her to redeem herself. I just let it hang there, the way her words had hung in the air that day on the phone. She doesn't belong in our life anymore. I wondered if she heard those words echoing now, bouncing back at her like a slap from her own hand. You're being ridiculous, she said, laughing once, a short, sharp, humorless sound. Is this about money? Mom, don't be dramatic. This is your legacy. You said you wanted me to have it. You've said that my whole life. I also said I thought you loved me, I replied quietly. That shut her up. For real this time. Her face went pale, all the way to the roots, like she hadn't expected that kind of answer, like she hadn't expected me to feel something. She stood abruptly, the cup still clutched in her hand, trembling now. I watched her take a few steps toward the window, away from me, like she couldn't stand to be that close anymore. She stared out at the ocean, her back to me. When did you become so spiteful? She said, almost to herself. Is this what getting old does to people? The words didn't sting. They used to. But now, they just confirmed everything I already knew. She didn't understand me. She didn't know me. I was a caricature in her mind, a dependent old woman she could roll her eyes at during brunch. And for a long time, I'd let her think that. I'd played my part. I'd kept my needs quiet, my emotions tucked neatly away so I wouldn't rock the boat. But not anymore. I became this way the day I heard what you really thought of me, I said softly. You forgot to hang up, remember? I didn't need to explain. She knew exactly what I meant. The way her body froze. The way her breath caught in her throat. That was all the proof I needed. Her grip tightened around the cup. Oh, she whispered. For a moment, I thought she might apologize, might finally let the walls come down. But then she turned around, and her face was all armor again, defensive, proud, furious. "So you're punishing me?" "No," I said. "I'm protecting myself. There's a difference." She shook her head, almost laughing, but there was no humor in it. "Fine," she snapped, "if that's how you want to do things. But don't come crying to me when you realize how alone you are." I looked at her, really looked. And then I said the thing I didn't even know was sitting on my chest until it left my mouth. "I've been alone for years, sweetheart. You just gave me permission to stop pretending otherwise." She stood there for a few seconds longer, her face like stone, then turned and left without another word. The door closed behind her with a soft click. Not a slam, not a bang. Just a quiet ending. A punctuation mark. And I sat down in my armchair, the silence folding around me like a blanket, warm and final. I had expected pain. I had expected regret. But all I felt was relief. The silence after she left wasn't empty. It was honest. For the first time in what felt like years, the house wasn't straining beneath unspoken tension. It wasn't filled with the ghost of who we used to be. It was just quiet. And somehow, that quiet felt like truth. I sat in my chair, the one with the worn arms and the cushion that had molded to my body over the years, and stared at the front door. She hadn't even looked back. Not once. Not after everything we'd shared. Not after the holidays, the scraped knees, the college tuition I barely managed to cover, the nights I stayed awake pacing, waiting for her to come home safe. Nothing. She had walked away like I was a stranger on the street. But then again, maybe I always had been. Maybe I'd just never let myself see it. I thought I'd feel grief. That this would feel like some kind of death. But grief is what you feel when something valuable is lost. This question mark. This was something else. This was the quiet aftermath of a storm I should have seen coming. The kind of storm that doesn't arrive suddenly, but grows slowly in the distance, while you convince yourself the sky is still blue. I used to dream of growing old with family close by. Holidays full of laughter, grandkids running down the hallway, and my daughter calling just to say hello, not because she needed anything, but because she missed my voice. I clung to those fantasies like a safety net, even when the rope began to fray, even when the calls became less frequent, even when her affection turned transactional. "Love you, Mom," she'd say at the end of every call, like a period, not a sentence, not a feeling, a reflex, and I'd set it back every time, because I thought that's what mothers do. But what no one ever tells you is that mothers can be broken too. We bleed. We ache. We hold the weight of generations in our hands and are expected to never flinch, never drop it, never crack. Until we do. Until the call that doesn't hang up. Until the laughter you hear isn't warmth, but cruelty. Until the realization hits that the person you'd sacrifice your soul for doesn't see you as a person at all. I got up from the chair and wandered through the house, touched the kitchen table where we used to eat breakfast together, when she still lived here, when we still felt like a family. Ran my fingers along the piano she never learned to play, though I paid for lessons every Thursday. I stepped into her old room, still half full of forgotten boxes and posters curling at the corners, and it hit me. She had outgrown this house long ago. She'd just never said it out loud. Not until that phone call. I swallowed hard and closed my eyes. The wind brushed against my face like a whisper, and for the first time, I didn't feel like I was falling apart. I felt like I was finally standing up. Because if she didn't want this house, this history, this version of me, I would find someone who did. A new beneficiary, a new purpose, a new chapter. She could keep her distance. I was reclaiming my future. one breath at a time. I didn't hear from her for 10 days. 10 days of silence, after a lifetime of noise. Not just the literal noise, though there had always been plenty of that, but the noise in my head, the endless hum of wondering if I was doing enough, being enough, giving enough. That noise had been part of me since the day I held her for the first time. And now, in the quiet aftermath of everything, it was fading. But the ache stayed. Because no matter how many legal documents I rewrote or how firmly I stood my ground, there was still that thread. That invisible string between a mother and a daughter that doesn't snap. It frays, it burns, it thins to a strand you can barely feel anymore, but it never truly breaks. It's the curse and the gift of motherhood. I'd wake in the middle of the night with her name in my throat. I'd think of a funny story, something small and meaningless, and reach for my phone before stopping myself. Old habits die hard, especially the ones built on love. On the 8th day, I caught myself baking her favorite lemon bars. I had the eggs cracked, the flour sifted, the sugar halfway poured when I realized what I was doing. My hands paused mid-movement, sticky with butter and grief. I stared at the bowl and wondered if she'd ever crave my food again. If she even remembered how often I made it just for her, just to see her face light up. I dumped the bowl into the sink and didn't look back. On the 10th day, she finally texted. Just 4 words. We need to talk. No apology. No warmth. Just a summons. I stared at the screen, the glow of it harsh in the dim light of my bedroom. She still didn't get it. Still thought she held the power in this dynamic. Still assumed that all it would take was her showing up, offering a half-hearted explanation and a pout, and I'd fold the way I always had. I didn't respond right away. I let her words sit there, unanswered. I knew what she wanted to talk about. The will, the house, the consequences she hadn't expected. She wanted to reverse the damage, but not the emotional kind. No, that she wouldn't dare confront. That would require accountability. Later that afternoon, she showed up unannounced. I opened the door and saw her standing there, arms crossed, her expression tight, defensive, still too proud to knock softly, still too proud to say the words that mattered. "Can I come in?" she asked. I stepped aside. She walked in like she hadn't stormed out a week ago, like she hadn't reduced our relationship to terms and conditions. She looked around, as if expecting something to have changed, something tangible she could point to and say, "That's not fair. That's not how it's supposed to be." I sat in my chair. She didn't sit right away. "So," she began, pacing a little. "You really changed the will?" I nodded. Her mouth tightened. "Why? Because I vented? Because I was frustrated? Everyone says things they don't mean sometimes." "You meant them," I said. "You said them when you thought I wasn't listening. That's when people say what's true." She stopped pacing. "That's not fair," she snapped. "No," I replied. "It's not. But it's honest." She looked at me then, really looked, and I saw something flicker behind her eyes. Maybe it was shame. Maybe it was fear. Or maybe it was just the dawning realization that the woman in front of her wasn't afraid of being alone anymore. "You're really going to cut me out over one phone call?" she whispered. "No," I said softly. "I'm cutting you out over years of pretending. One phone call just finally turned the lights on." Her lip trembled, just barely. She turned away, staring out the window at the same sea I had stood before days ago. "I didn't think you'd actually do it," she said. "I know," I replied. "That's why I did. Because it was never about revenge. It was about clarity, about finally choosing myself after decades of choosing her. And in that moment, I knew. She might never understand. But I didn't need her to. I had finally made peace with the truth. And peace, I was learning, was stronger than love that only showed up when it wanted something. She didn't cry. That's what surprised me most. Even after everything, after I confirmed what she never believed I had the strength to do, she stood there, dry-eyed, stiff-jawed, her arms folded like armor. The silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. She didn't ask me to change it. She didn't plead or explain. She just stood at my window, watching the waves, as if the ocean might offer her the answers she refused to ask from me. When she finally spoke, her voice had changed. Not softer, just smaller, more careful. "I know you're angry," she said. Angry. The word didn't even fit. Anger was sharp and loud. Anger came and went. This wasn't anger. "I'm not angry," I replied. "I'm tired." She turned, confused. "Tired?" she echoed, like the concept didn't compute. "Yes," I said. "Tired of making excuses for you. Tired of convincing myself I'm still wanted. Tired of calling and hoping for more than 5 minutes of your distracted attention. I'm tired of being tolerated instead of loved." Her face twisted, just for a moment. A flicker of guilt, maybe. Or maybe just discomfort. Being held accountable wasn't something she was used to. "That's not fair," she said quietly. "You have no idea how much I've had on my plate these past few years." I stood now, slowly, my legs stiff from sitting, my heart heavier than I let on. But I needed her to hear this, to see it plainly, without the sugarcoating I had wrapped everything in for decades. "I was on your plate," I said, "like a task to be dealt with, not a person, not a mother. You think I didn't notice? The birthdays forgotten, the rushed phone calls, the way you looked through me at family dinners as if I was already fading?" She opened her mouth, but I didn't let her speak. Not yet. I had swallowed too much silence already. "I spent years pretending you were just busy, that you'd come around, that maybe one day you'd sit next to me again and just be there, not checking your phone, not counting the minutes, just present." But that day never came. Her face flushed, her arms tightening around her body like she was holding herself together. "You don't know what it's like," she whispered, her voice cracking. "To have everything expected of you. The pressure, the judgment. You act like I'm the only one who's failed you, but you never really made it easy, Mom." There it was, the turn. The moment she flipped the script and handed the guilt back to me like a hot coal. I used to take it, every time. Let it burn into my palms until I almost believed I deserved the blame. But not this time. "I made it hard?" I asked, stepping closer. "I made it hard by what? Aging? By needing kindness? By wanting to feel like I still mattered to you?" She looked down, ashamed now. I could see it in the way her shoulders slumped just slightly, the way her bottom lip quivered like it used to when she was 5, and knew she'd done something wrong. "You didn't just stop calling," I said softly. "You made me feel like loving me was a chore." She finally sat down, slowly, carefully, as if her legs couldn't hold her up anymore. "I didn't mean to," she said, her voice barely audible. I didn't think you noticed." That broke something in me. "I noticed everything," I said. We sat there, just breathing the same air, not looking at each other. Not yet. I didn't offer comfort, not this time. She had to sit in it, the pain, the consequence, the truth. Because maybe, just maybe, this was the first time she was finally beginning to feel what I had carried for years. The hollow ache of being invisible in someone's life, even when they were still standing right in front of you. She sat there in silence, her fingers twisting the hem of her sleeve like a child again. And for a brief second, she looked so small. Not in stature, but in presence. All that polished, grown-up veneer, the career confidence, the crisp voice she used when talking down to me on the phone, the clipped laughs she gave in conversations where I was more background noise than a participant. Gone. Just a daughter now. A girl trying to find the edges of a mother she thought would always be there no matter how far she pushed. I watched her as she struggled to find the right thing to say. Maybe for the first time, she realized there were no magic words to undo what had already been done. I wanted to feel vindicated. I wanted to feel powerful. After all, I had finally stood up. I had finally said the things I'd kept pressed down behind tight smiles and gracious nods for years. But there was no victory in this moment. No triumph. Just the heavy silence between two people who once knew each other better than anyone else in the world, and now sat as strangers in the same room. "I thought I was doing enough," she said, her voice breaking the stillness. "I called. I visited sometimes. I thought that was what you needed." I looked at her, my jaw tight. I could feel the heat rise to my eyes, but I didn't let it fall. I'd cried enough tears in secret. I didn't owe her any more. "Needed?" I said. "Number you thought it was enough to keep me quiet. Enough to make me believe I hadn't been forgotten." She looked down at her hands, lips pressed into a thin line. I knew that look. It was the same one she wore when she was young, and the truth didn't align with what she wanted it to be. But this time, I wasn't smoothing it over. I wasn't saving her from it. "I didn't want to hurt you," she whispered. "You didn't want to deal with me," I corrected. The words hung there, cruel in their accuracy. "I didn't know you felt this way," she tried again. "You always said you were fine, that you didn't need anything." I let out a hollow laugh, the sound shocking even to me. "I said I was fine because I had to, because every time I hinted at being lonely or struggling, you acted like I was a burden. So I stopped saying anything. I stopped expecting anything." She blinked hard, her eyes shining now. Still no tears, but close. She looked like someone realizing they'd been handed something precious and never even unwrapped it before it was taken away. "I thought you were strong," she said. "You always were." "I still am," I replied. "That's why I finally did what I did." She looked up at me now. Really looked. And I could see it, that flicker of panic. The realization that love has limits, even a mother's. That you can't treat someone like a second thought forever and expect them to wait patiently in the wings for their cue to be loved again. "You really changed the will," she said. "You really did it." I nodded. "Yes." "To who?" I didn't answer right away. I let the silence answer for me. Let her sit in the fact that it no longer concerned her. That the woman she thought she knew, the one who always gave and gave, had drawn a boundary, and this time, it was ironclad. She stared at me, searching for a crack, a soft place where she might still slip in. But there was none. Not anymore. "I don't know what to say," she murmured. "Maybe you don't need to say anything," I replied. "Maybe it's not about the words anymore." She sat back, her expression faltering. "Then what is it about?" she asked. "It's about time," I said. "The time we didn't spend, the conversations we didn't have, the birthdays you forgot, the loneliness you ignored. And now, it's about what I do with the time I have left, how I choose to spend it, and who I choose to leave something of myself to." I could see it settling into her now. The loss. Not of the house. Not of the money. But of something much deeper. Of me. Because for the first time, She was seeing the real cost of her absence. And she knew, this time, she couldn't afford it. She stayed for another 20 minutes, maybe less, but it felt like hours. I don't remember much of what she said after that, not because it wasn't important, but because it was all wrapped in fear, not love. Her words became careful, like someone trying to repair a painting they'd already ruined. Every sentence she offered sounded like negotiation, not reconciliation. I think that's when I finally understood she hadn't come here to make things right. She'd come here because she was afraid I'd meant what I said. She was afraid I had finally chosen myself. And I had. When she stood to leave, her eyes scanned the room like it might be the last time she'd see it as hers. Her gaze landed on the mantel, on the old photo of her father and me at the beach, both of us sunburned and laughing, sand on our legs, and the wind in our hair. She used to say that was her favorite photo. I wondered if it still was, or if now, even our joy looked like a threat. "I hope we can talk again," she said at the door, her voice gentle, rehearsed. "Maybe once we've both had time." I nodded once, not committing. She didn't hug me. I didn't offer. The door clicked shut behind her, and I stood there for a long time, staring at the empty space where she'd just been. Not mourning, not regretting, just breathing. Taking in the fact that for the first time in years, I had stood my ground, and the world hadn't fallen apart. That night, the house felt different. Not louder, not quieter. Just mine. I poured a glass of wine and sat in my favorite chair by the fire, letting the crackling logs fill the space she used to dominate so carelessly. Her presence had once been everywhere, even when she wasn't physically here. In my thoughts, in my guilt, in the way I arranged the guest room sheets just in case she ever decided to visit. But not anymore. Something had shifted. I wasn't rearranging my world for her anymore. I was building it back around myself. I thought about the life I had once imagined, growing old with Sunday visits, her kids running through the halls, her calling me for recipes or advice, or just to say, "I love you, Mom." I had clung to that vision like a life raft, even as the truth kept pulling me under. But that fantasy had been carved from my hope, not her actions. Her actions told another story, a story of absence, of cold calls and colder silences, of holidays missed and apologies that never came. She had taught me, over time, how little space I truly held in her life. And I had finally learned. The next morning, I opened the window to let in the ocean breeze. The sea was calm, the sky soft with morning haze. I made coffee and sat outside, wrapping myself in an old sweater and letting the sun slowly warm my skin. The world didn't feel quite so heavy anymore. Later, I made another call to Richard, the new lawyer. We had already finalized most of the changes, but there were a few final details I wanted to confirm. "I'd like to include something else," I told him. "A letter. Something she can read when I'm gone." There was a pause on his end. "Of course," he said. "Do you want help drafting it?" "No," I replied. "This one's mine, all mine." After I hung up, I sat down at the kitchen table, a fresh page before me, the pen steady in my hand. For the first time in a long time, I didn't write as a mother desperate to be heard. I wrote as a woman who had finally been silent for too long. I didn't write to hurt her. I didn't write to punish her. I wrote to tell the truth. Because one day, long after I'm gone, when she finds herself wondering how we ended up this way, she'll read it. And she'll know. Not the watered-down version she might tell herself, not the excuse-laced revision of events, but the real story. The first words of the letter came slower than I expected. I sat with the pen poised over the page, hand steady, heart not so much. "What do you write to a daughter who once called you everything, and now treats you like a distant obligation? What do you say when you've already said everything in 1,000 unspoken ways, through birthday cards sent without reply, through voicemails she never returned, through meals cooked and cold by the time she arrived, if she arrived at all? But I wrote anyway. Not because I owed her an explanation, not because I hoped to mend what was broken. I wrote because there are truths that deserve to be spoken aloud, even if they're only ever read in the quiet after I'm gone. My dear girl, I began, if you're reading this, then I'm not here anymore. And maybe that's the only way I could get you to really listen. Maybe it always had to come to this, the silence of absence before the weight of presence could be understood. I didn't change the will to hurt you. I changed it because you already left me long before I signed the paper. You walked away piece by piece, moment by moment. The first time you forgot my birthday. The first time you called and rushed off the phone before I even had the chance to ask how you were. The first time you came to visit but spent the entire meal scrolling through your phone, not seeing me. Not really. I stopped to breathe, the ache in my chest no longer sharp, just hollow. I don't think you meant to be cruel. But cruelty doesn't always come with shouting and slammed doors. Sometimes it's soft. It's the neglect you don't notice because you're too busy. It's the sigh in your voice when I call. It's the way you show up late and leave early. It's the way I faded from your life like an old photograph no one bothers to frame. When did I stop being that? I know life is messy. I know I wasn't perfect. I lost my temper. I held on too tight. I gave when I should have stepped back, and I stepped back when I should have fought harder. But I always loved you, even in the quiet, even when you forgot me. Especially then. My throat tightened. I closed my eyes, letting the weight of that truth settle. I loved you through every silence, through every brush off, through every year where I pretended your absence didn't hollow me out. But love, my dear, is not meant to be a performance of endurance. I am not here to be a backdrop for your life. I am a person. A mother, yes, but also a woman who deserves to be seen, to be valued, to be remembered without needing to beg. Tears blurred my vision, but I didn't stop. The pen felt lighter now, like I was writing myself free. You may hate me for this, for the decisions I made, for the inheritance I gave to someone else. But understand this, it was never about money. It was about memory, about giving my legacy to someone who would hold it with care, who wouldn't see this house as just an asset, but as a place where love once lived. I hope you heal. I hope you find your way back to your own softness. I hope one day, when you are older, and perhaps find yourself staring out a window like I did so many times, you'll remember this, not with bitterness, but with understanding. I am not punishing you. I am setting myself free. With love, always, more than you ever knew, Mom. I placed the letter in an envelope and sealed it with trembling hands. I tucked it in the folder with the new will, under strict instructions to be delivered upon my passing. And then I sat back, letting the quiet fill the room again. But this time, the silence didn't ache. It breathed. It pulsed. It felt like peace. The letter was done, folded neatly, sealed tight, tucked away where she'd eventually find it. Not today, not tomorrow, but one day when I was no longer around to soften the edges or explain away the sting. And that was the point. She needed to read it without me sitting across the room, without me trying to make her feel better about the truth. It was the kind of honesty that could only be delivered in absence, when there was nothing left to lose and nothing more to take. I sat at the kitchen table long after I had slipped the letter into the file with the updated will. The afternoon light had changed, the sun lower now, casting long shadows across the floorboards. I traced them with my eyes, wondering how many times I had watched this exact light drift across this exact room, waiting for a call that never came. It was funny how habit clings to the body long after the reason for it disappears. The kettle whistled, sharp and sudden, breaking the stillness. I stood, poured the water, and watched the steam curl into the air like a ghost rising. I wondered if this house would feel like a ghost to her when I was gone. If she'd walk these rooms and hear echoes she never noticed while I was alive. If she'd see the life she'd dismissed, finally, when there was no one left to witness it with her. I carried the tea to the porch. The sky was burning gold now, the ocean stretching endlessly beneath it. For a moment, I let myself remember the early years. When she was little and would crawl into my lap, her hair still damp from the bath, her voice sweet with sleep. She used to press her tiny hand against my chest and say, "I can hear your heart, Mommy." Back then, she had listened. I wrapped the blanket tighter around my shoulders and watched the waves crash. My heart still beat in my chest, steady and strong, but it had been breaking in quiet ways for years. It's a strange kind of grief, mourning a relationship that hasn't ended, just eroded. Mourning the person someone used to be, while they still walk around wearing the same face. People don't talk about that kind of grief. The slow kind. The kind you carry with you like an old injury that aches when it rains. There's no funeral for it. No casseroles delivered. No condolences sent. Just silence. Just you. Alone. Learning how to let go of someone who's already let go of you. I didn't blame her for becoming someone I didn't recognize. Life does that to people. It hardens them, speeds them up, makes them forget the softness they came from. But what I couldn't forgive, what I wouldn't excuse anymore, was how easily she left me behind. How quickly I became background noise. How my love, once her shelter, became her inconvenience. I took a sip of tea. It had gone lukewarm, but I didn't care. The truth was, I had spent too many years loving her from a place of desperation, wanting to be needed, to feel useful, to matter. It had made me quiet when I should have spoken, forgiving when I should have demanded better. But something inside me had shifted, not with fury, not with spite, with clarity, with the kind of stillness that only comes after you've sat long enough with your own pain to know it by name. She would never see me the way I wanted her to, and that was no longer my burden to carry. A gust of wind lifted the edge of the blanket, and I pulled it closer, breathing in the scent of salt and sea. This was my home, my life, my story, and I would not let it be rewritten by someone who had barely bothered to read the pages. That night, I lit a candle and set it by the letter. A small flame, steady and warm. I watched it flicker in the dark and whispered the words I'd never gotten to say to her face. I loved you more than you'll ever know, but I finally love myself enough to let go. The flame danced, silent and graceful, as if it understood, as if it too had been waiting for this moment. I sat there, in the glow of truth and the hush of night, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Freedom, not from her, but from the weight of needing her to be someone she was never willing to become. The days that followed were both lighter and lonelier. That's the paradox of letting go. You shed the weight, but the silence it leaves behind echoes differently. At first, it was peaceful, the kind of quiet that soothed the ache in my bones. But soon, it shifted, morphing into something unfamiliar, like walking through a house you used to know by heart, only to realize the walls no longer remember you. I stopped waiting for her to call. That was the first real change. There was no more glancing at the phone every time it buzzed, no more racing heart at the sight of her name on the screen. No more telling myself, maybe this time she'll just call to talk. Maybe this time it won't be about needing something. That hope had been a thread I'd held onto for too long, fraying it with every unanswered message, every postponed visit, every half-hearted, "Sorry, I've just been really busy." I finally let it snap. Instead, I filled the time with small things that felt like mine again. I cleaned out drawers that hadn't been touched in years. I went through photo albums, some so old the colors had faded into memory. I found a picture of her when she was 6, sitting on her father's shoulders, both of them laughing so hard the camera had blurred. I traced the image with my fingertip and let the tears come, not out of sadness, but reverence. That little girl loved me once, fiercely, unapologetically. And then time and life and distance happened. Or maybe it was something else. Maybe it was something I'll never quite understand. But I couldn't chase that little girl through memory anymore, hoping to find her in the woman who now looked right through me. One afternoon, I drove into town and met Margaret for coffee. She was one of the few friends who had stood by me through everything, the kind of friend who didn't need all the details to know when your heart was carrying too much. We sat by the window of the small cafe we used to visit when our children were still in school, when the future felt open and shimmering, not closed off and rearranged. She reached across the table and took my hand, her eyes filled with knowing. "How are you really?" she asked. I wanted to lie, to say I was fine, that it felt empowering, that I was liberated and full of peace. But the words caught in my throat. I feel like I finally stood up, and now I don't know where to go. Margaret nodded. She didn't rush me, didn't fill the silence. That's the thing about old friends. They let the pauses breathe. "She doesn't understand what she lost," I said after a moment. "Not yet. Maybe not ever." "No," Margaret agreed. "But you do, and that matters more." I let those words settle. I let them sink past the grief and land somewhere deeper, somewhere solid. That night, I stood at the edge of the porch, the wind tugging at the hem of my robe. The sky was heavy with stars, thick and humming. I could hear the ocean breathing in the dark. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like I was standing in the aftermath of something. I felt like I was standing at the beginning. Because letting go of someone doesn't mean you stop loving them. It means you stop waiting for them to love you the way you deserve. That kind of clarity hurts. It tears through you in slow, excruciating waves. But when it passes, what's left is something unshakable. A version of yourself you can trust again. I thought about the letter, tucked away safely with the documents. I thought about her reading it one day. Maybe she'd cry. Maybe she'd rage. Maybe she'd call me selfish or cold or ungrateful. She'd be wrong. But I was done correcting the way she chose to see me. Let her call it what she needed to call it to sleep at night. I knew the truth. And finally, that was enough. The next morning, I made a list of things I'd been putting off. Not out of procrastination, but because I was always waiting for her visit, her call, her attention. I had built so much of my time around her absence, I hadn't realized how much life was passing me by while I sat at the window, hoping to be remembered. Not anymore. I signed up for a pottery class at the community center. I bought new walking shoes and started going down to the beach every morning, letting the sand remind me what it felt like to be grounded. I spent hours in the garden, my hands deep in the soil, growing something that asked for nothing but care. I started living again, not as someone's mother, not as someone's forgotten past, but as myself. And with each small step, each quiet act of reclaiming, I felt something powerful returning. Not joy, not quite yet, but dignity. And that, I realized, was the first true gift I had given to myself in a very long time. The morning I found the envelope on my doorstep, the sky was low and gray. A kind of thick, Overcast silence hung in the air, the kind that presses down on you, heavy and expectant. The sea looked distant, even though it was just steps away, as though the world had pulled itself inward, bracing for something. At first, I thought it was just another piece of mail, a misplaced letter from a neighbor or a flyer stuck under the doormat by mistake. But when I picked it up, my name was written across the front in her handwriting. Slanted, rushed, familiar. I stared at it for a long time before going inside. I didn't open it right away. I left it on the table next to the cold cup of tea I hadn't touched since sunrise. I cleaned the kitchen. I swept the floor. I even took out the compost, anything to delay whatever words were sealed inside. Because no matter what they said, I knew they would hurt. A letter is an intimacy you can't interrupt. It unfolds in its own time. There's no space for questions or clarifications, no opportunity to respond in real time. Just one voice, one truth, one version of events offered without negotiation. And hers, well, hers would be soaked in things she wasn't ready to say to my face. By late afternoon, I sat down with it. My hands were steady, but my heart felt like glass. I peeled it open slowly, each tear of the paper loud in the stillness of the house. "Mom," it began, "I don't know if this letter will fix anything. I'm not even sure if you'll want to read it. But I'm writing it because you were right. I don't listen. I haven't listened in a long time. Already, the ache started low in my chest. I've spent days trying to think of how to explain myself, how to justify what you heard. But the truth is, I can't. You weren't supposed to hear it? No. But that doesn't mean it wasn't real. It was how I felt. I was overwhelmed and selfish, and so wrapped up in my own life that I forgot how to see you. How to really see you. I blinked hard, the words blurring. I told myself you were strong. I told myself you didn't need me the way you used to. But I think I told myself those things so I could feel less guilty for not showing up. I convinced myself you were fine, so I wouldn't have to face the fact that I'd become distant. And cruel. I was cruel, Mom. I'm not proud of it. She kept going. Line after line of regret and confusion, peppered with childhood memories she hadn't brought up in years. Me brushing her hair while she told me about her day. The sound of her father's laugh in the kitchen. The lemon bars I used to make when she was sick. Little things I had carried in my heart like fragile keepsakes. She remembered. God, she remembered. I think somewhere along the way, I stopped believing you were human, she wrote. Isn't that terrible? I looked at you like a role, not a person. Like you were here to support me, hold me, guide me. And I forgot that maybe you needed those things too. That maybe mothers don't stop needing love just because their children grow up. The tears came slow and quiet. I didn't wipe them away. I let them fall, let them stain the paper, let them carry the weight of the years I'd spent hoping she would see me again. I read the letter you left with the will, she continued. I read it twice, then a third time, and each time it cut deeper. Not because it was cruel, but because it was honest. I didn't know how far away I'd drifted until you laid it all out in front of me. And you were right. It wasn't one phone call. It was 1,000 small moments where I chose everything else over you. I closed my eyes, pressing the letter to my chest. I don't know how to fix this, she wrote. I don't know if I can. But I want to try. I don't want to keep pretending like we're okay when we're not. I don't want to wake up one day and realize it's too late. Her final lines were messier, like the pen had trembled. You were the first place I ever felt safe. The first person who ever taught me what love meant. And I lost that. I lost you. And now all I want is to find my way back, if you'll let me. I love you, Mom. That was it. No grand promises, no manipulations, just the raw, uneven truth. I set the letter down, my hands trembling now, not from fear, but from something I hadn't let myself feel in a long time. Hope. Not the reckless kind. Not the kind that waits by the phone, but the kind that recognizes pain and still reaches for the light anyway. She hadn't fixed everything, but for the first time, she'd stopped hiding behind excuses and pride. She had taken off the mask. And maybe, just maybe, this was the first brick in a bridge we could start building together. I didn't respond to her letter right away. Even after reading it 3 times, even after crying quietly into my sweater sleeves, even after sitting at the edge of my bed and whispering, "Thank you," to the stillness of the room, I waited. Not out of anger, not out of punishment, but because something inside me needed to hold that space just a little longer. To let the apology settle in a place that had been hollow for too long. The thing about pain is that it doesn't release its grip just because someone says, "I'm sorry." It loosens, yes. It shifts. But it doesn't vanish. Not when it's been carried like a second skin. Not when it's shaped how you walk, how you speak, how you expect, or stop expecting, love. Still, there was something different now. I could feel it. Her words were raw, not curated, not careful. They were the kind that came from sitting alone with yourself in the quiet after everything breaks. I knew that place. I'd lived there. I'd set the table for one in that silence and called it home. And now, it seemed she was finding her way there too. A week passed. 7 days of quiet mornings and long walks and deep breaths that felt a little less heavy than before. I kept the letter on the kitchen counter, folded neatly under a small stone I'd picked up from the beach. I'd run my fingers over it each day, not to reread it, but to remind myself it was real, that the distance between us wasn't as fixed as it had seemed. Then one morning, the phone rang. Her name lit up on the screen. I stared at it for a moment, unsure if I was ready to hear her voice. The letter had been one thing, a still, quiet surrender. But her voice, live and trembling, might crack me open in a way I wasn't ready for. Still, my hand moved on its own. I answered. "Mom?" she said. Just that. Just my name, in her voice, soft and uncertain. "I'm here," I replied. And the quiet between us then, it was different. Not sharp, not accusing, but tender, like a held breath. "I don't know where to start," she whispered. "You already did," I said. "With the letter." She let out a shaky exhale. "I meant every word." "I know," I replied. "That's why I read it more than once." There was a pause. A fragile space we both sat inside, neither of us sure what came next. "I want to see you," she said finally. "If you'll let me." And the truth was, I wanted to see her too. I wanted to see her face when she said those words again out loud. I wanted to hold her gaze and find the little girl still hiding somewhere behind the woman who had forgotten how to come home. But more than anything, I wanted to know if she could sit with me in the aftermath. Not to fix it. Not to undo what was done. But just to be there. "All right," I said. "Come tomorrow." She did. She arrived in the late morning, standing on the porch with her hands clutched tightly in front of her. She looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically, but emotionally. Like someone who had finally realized how much space they had taken without giving any back. I opened the door and stepped aside. We didn't rush to hug. We didn't fall into sobbing embraces like some movie. We just stood there for a moment, looking at each other as we really were. 2 women, both hurt, both hopeful, both willing to try. We sat in the living room, across from each other, the fireplace flickering low even though the day wasn't cold. She looked around the house the way someone looks at a museum of their own past, half awe, half guilt. I could tell she saw the life she'd once had here, the comfort, the love. "I used to feel so safe here," she said softly, her eyes on the mantel. "I don't know when I stopped coming back." "You didn't stop," I replied. "You just drifted." She turned to me, eyes glassy. "Do you hate me?" I didn't answer right away. Not because I was unsure, but because the question was too small for what we'd been through. "No," I said. "I don't hate you. I just stopped waiting for you to remember me." She nodded, wiping her cheek. "I want to earn it back," she said. "Not the house, not the inheritance, just you." This time, I did reach for her hand. Her fingers were colder than I remembered, but they held tight. And in that small gesture, I felt something shift. Not everything was healed. Not yet. But something broken had stopped bleeding, and something whole had started to breathe. We sat like that for a while, her hand in mine, the fire crackling softly between us, as if it too had grown tired of the silence that had taken root in this house. There was no rush to speak, no need to fill the air with apologies or explanations. Sometimes, presence is louder than words. Sometimes, simply staying is the most honest thing a person can offer. But eventually, she let go of my hand and sat back, folding her arms across her chest, not defensively, not to guard herself, but like someone holding something fragile, something she wasn't sure she deserved to keep. "I've been thinking," she said, her voice cautious, "about all the times you tried to reach me. The times you called just to say hello, or dropped by the office when you were in town, and I pretended to be too busy. I replay them now, and I wish I had just looked up." I didn't interrupt. I let her sit with the weight of her own memories. "It's like I put you in this corner of my life," she continued. "This safe little box labeled Mom. Someone who would always be there no matter how far I drifted. I thought that was love. But now, I see it wasn't love. It was assumption. It was convenience." Her voice cracked at the end of that word, and she looked down at her lap like she was ashamed to meet my eyes. I had spent years asking myself where I went wrong. Was it something I said? Something I didn't say? A way I raised her? Or failed to? I replayed our history like a scratched record, looking for the moment it all changed. But maybe that was the wrong question all along. Maybe it wasn't about where I failed. It was about where she forgot. Forgot to see me. Forgot that mothers are not made of stone, that we bend and stretch and carry until we can't anymore. "You know," I said finally, "I used to sit by that phone for hours, thinking if I could just say the right thing, you'd come back to me. But the truth is, it was never about the right words. It was about time. The time you didn't want to give. And I kept making excuses for it, telling myself you were busy, telling myself you'd change, that you'd remember what we once had." She nodded slowly. "I told myself the same things, that it wasn't personal, that I'd visit next weekend or call you on Sunday. But Sunday always became Monday, and then the week disappeared." I looked at her, really looked, and saw the girl I used to know still flickering beneath the surface. The girl who clung to my leg at kindergarten drop-off. The one who used to leave me notes on my pillow, written in crayon, spelling "I love you" in crooked letters. Somewhere, buried under all that distance and adulthood, she was still there. Lost, but not gone. "I don't want this to be the story of us," she said, voice trembling. "A daughter who took too long to come back, and a mother who gave up before she did." A part of me wanted to believe that everything could return to the way it was. But that part was naive. What was broken between us couldn't be undone, only understood, only carried together now, side by side. I didn't give up, I said gently. I gave myself back to me. She cried then, not the quiet, careful kind, but the kind that comes from the deepest part of you. The kind that's been waiting, pressing against your ribs for years, begging to be let out. And I let her cry. I didn't reach for tissues. I didn't try to soothe her. I just sat beside her and let the grief pour out of her like it had poured out of me for so long. Eventually, she wiped her face with the sleeve of her sweater, eyes red, but finally clear. I want to come home again, she said. Not just to this house, to you. I placed a hand over hers. Then come, I said. But come as you are. No more pretending. No more apologies you don't mean. Just you. That's all I ever wanted. We sat until the fire burned low, until the sky outside turned a pale shade of blue, and the light began to return to the edges of the world. And maybe, just maybe, to us. The days that followed felt different, not entirely healed, not perfect, but softer, like the world had tilted slightly and let in a little more light. She started showing up again, slowly, cautiously, like someone dipping their toes into water they once abandoned. And I didn't push. I didn't demand explanations or ask for more than she could give. I simply opened the door when she knocked. At first, the visits were brief. An hour here, a walk by the beach there. But there was something in her presence now that hadn't been there before. Intent. She wasn't showing up out of guilt or obligation. She wasn't rushing out the door the moment the silence grew too thick. She stayed. She asked questions. She listened. One morning, she brought over groceries, the kind she remembered I liked, the marmalade from the corner shop, the tea I always kept in the second drawer, the little square biscuits I dipped into my cup when I thought no one was watching. I didn't know if you were out, she said, placing the bag on the counter. And I thought it might be nice to make breakfast, like we used to. I didn't say anything at first. I just watched her. The way she unpacked things carefully, like each item was more than food, like it was penance, or maybe a peace offering. She made the eggs a little runny, just how I liked. Toasted the bread until it was golden and not a moment more. And we sat together at the table, the same one where I'd once served her cocoa after long days at school, where I'd stitched her dance costumes by hand while she did her homework. We didn't talk much, but we didn't need to. Sometimes healing speaks best in silence. After breakfast, she lingered. She picked up a photo from the shelf in the hallway. It was one of her as a child, about 8 years old, laughing with a mouthful of missing teeth, holding a seashell in one hand and clinging to my arm with the other. I used to think you were magic, she said, turning to me. Like nothing could ever hurt me as long as I was near you. You weren't wrong, I replied. She smiled then, the kind of smile that pulls a little too hard at the corners because it's holding back something bigger. I don't know when I stopped believing that, she said. I do, I answered. It was the day you realized I could hurt too. She blinked, like the truth of that had never occurred to her before. I walked over and stood beside her, both of us looking at the picture now. You needed me to be unbreakable, so you didn't have to look at your own cracks. I'm sorry, she whispered, and this time, it wasn't part of a grand gesture. It wasn't a line in a speech she'd practiced. It was just real, small, honest. I nodded, not in dismissal, but in understanding. We didn't rewrite the past. That wasn't possible. But what we did, slowly, carefully, was begin to write something new. Something neither of us had expected, not after the way things had torn apart. And in some ways, that made it more precious. We weren't trying to go back. We were finally, mercifully, moving forward. She came again the next weekend, and the one after that. She started helping in the garden, hands deep in the dirt beside mine, laughing when the cats darted through the flower beds like they owned the world. She brought books she thought I'd like, movies we used to watch when she was a teenager, even an old board game we hadn't touched in years. And with each visit, something softened between us. One afternoon, as we sat on the porch watching the tide roll in, she turned to me and said, "I don't want you to change the will back. I know I hurt you, and I don't want anything that was built on pain." The words caught in my throat. I had expected her to ask, to hope, to try and undo the consequences she had once pretended didn't matter. But she didn't. She was letting it go. And in that moment, I realized just how far she'd come, not in words, but in growth. "I haven't thought about the will in weeks," I said truthfully, "because I've been too busy remembering what it feels like to have my daughter again." She reached for my hand and held it tightly. The sky above us was streaked with the colors of late afternoon, and the ocean stretched out before us, unbothered, steady, full of memory and promise. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was bracing for the next disappointment. I wasn't clinging to hope like a frayed rope. I was here. We were here. Still mending, still learning. But together. The air had changed. Not just the weather, though autumn was quietly slipping in. The breeze cooler, the evenings earlier, the leaves beginning to turn brittle around the edges. But something deeper. Something between us. I could feel it in the way she moved through the house now. No longer hesitant, no longer stepping around the weight of her own guilt. She didn't linger in the doorway anymore. She came in, sat down, and stayed. It had taken months of quiet rebuilding. No grand declarations, no dramatic apologies, just presence, just effort. And in the end, it had been enough. That Sunday, she brought over a small cake. Lemon, the way I liked it. Not store-bought. She had baked it herself, clumsily, she admitted, laughing at the way it had cracked in the center. She held it out like a fragile offering, and I took it with both hands, not because I needed the sweetness, but because I understood what it meant. We ate it in the kitchen, the window cracked open to let in the sound of the sea. A soft hum in the background, like a lullaby neither of us had noticed was playing all along. She told me stories I hadn't heard before, about her first real heartbreak, the one she never told me about, and the panic attacks she used to hide in her car before work, too proud to ask for help. I listened, not as a mother desperate to fix anything, but as a woman sitting across from another woman, finally meeting her where she stood. At one point, she looked up from her tea and said, "Do you think it's too late? To be close again?" I could have answered with a quick no. I could have rushed in to ease her worry, to wrap her in reassurances. But instead, I reached for her hand and let my thumb trace the edge of her palm, the way I used to when she was little, when she couldn't sleep and needed to know I was there. "I think we're already on our way," I said. Her eyes filled with something I couldn't quite name. Relief, maybe. Or gratitude. Or simply the release of a burden she'd been carrying in silence. She didn't speak for a long time after that. She just squeezed my hand and looked out the window, her face calm in a way I hadn't seen since she was a child. Later, she stood in the living room, holding the framed photo of her father. The same photo she used to kiss goodnight. The same one she hadn't looked at in years. "I miss him," she said softly. "Especially now." I nodded, feeling that ache ripple through my chest in a way that still caught me off guard after all this time. "He would have been proud of you," I said. She turned to me then, her voice trembling. "Would he have forgiven me? For everything?" I walked to her slowly and placed a hand on her shoulder. "He would have loved you through it, just like I do." And there it was. that invisible thread tightening again between us, not as it once was, but in a new way, stitched through with pain, forgiveness, and a quiet strength neither of us had expected to find again. Before she left that evening, we stood on the porch side by side, watching the sky slip into dusk. The sea stretched out before us, endless and quiet, a mirror of everything we couldn't say, but still understood. "I don't want to lose this again," she said. "You won't," I told her, "but this time we both have to hold on." She nodded, and when she hugged me goodbye, it was different. It wasn't tentative. It wasn't rushed. It was the kind of hug you give when you know what it's like to live without someone and have found your way back. After she drove away, I stayed on the porch a little longer, wrapped in the fading light, the blanket around my shoulders, the memory of her arms still warm on my skin. And I thought about all the versions of us we had been, mother and daughter, then strangers, then something fragile and in between. And now? Now we were something else. Not perfect, not whole, but real. I walked inside and made myself a cup of tea. The house no longer felt like a relic of what had been. It felt alive again, breathing, waiting not for her return, but for all the new beginnings that were still possible. And when I looked over at the table, where her empty cup still sat beside the half-finished cake, I smiled, not because it was sweet, but because it was evidence of effort, of love, of choosing each other again. And that, more than anything, felt like peace. The house is quiet again, not the aching silence of waiting, not the hollow kind that follows abandonment. This is a stillness I can live inside, a quiet that feels earned. Every creak of the floor, every distant crash of the waves, it all sounds different now, like music I had stopped hearing until someone pressed play again. It's strange the way things can heal, not all at once, not with fanfare, but slowly, like dawn creeping through the cracks of a room long shuttered. You don't notice it at first, the light, not really. But then it touches something, a photo on the wall, a teacup on the counter, and suddenly, the room is no longer dark. I had spent so many years loving in silence, holding on to a vision of family that was fading before my eyes. I convinced myself that to love her meant to accept less. Less time, less presence, less warmth. And when that thread finally snapped, I didn't know who I was without it. I had defined my life by her orbit, and when she drifted away, I mistook the emptiness for failure. But what I know now, what I carry with me, is that letting go isn't the same as giving up. Sometimes love means stepping back far enough to see if the other person will step forward. And if they do, it must be with both feet, with both hands open. Not because they feel guilt, not because they're afraid, but because they want to be there. And she did, eventually. She came back not to take, but to rebuild. Not everything is as it once was. It never will be. And maybe that's a good thing. Maybe we're better now, not because the pain didn't happen, but because we finally looked it in the eye and didn't run from it. I think, for the first time in a very long time, I feel like a whole person. Not a mother waiting at a window. Not a name scribbled into a calendar that never gets checked. Just me. A woman who dared to stand her ground, even when her heart was breaking. And she came back, not to save me, but because I finally stopped trying to save her. So if you're out there, waiting, aching, wondering if they'll ever see you, remember this. You are allowed to want more. You are allowed to stop shrinking yourself to fit inside someone else's comfort. And even if they never come back, you will survive it. Because I did. We're grateful you stayed with us. For more stories of women reclaiming their voice, click on the left and subscribe to stay connected. May this be a reminder. Your story has power too.